What happens when horror stops entertaining and starts confronting? On today's episode, I sit down with Nick Roberts, author of Nocturnal by Nature, a short story collection that doesn't just flirt with darkness, it plunges in head first. We talk psychological claustrophobia, body horror, writing from the mind of a killer, and how addiction, trauma, and redemption shape his brutally compelling fiction. So without further ado, I give you Nick Roberts. Nick, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me on this 25th day of April 2025. I came across your work on Bookstagram and was immediately intrigued by your background in addiction recovery. As they say in recovery circles, religion is for people who are trying to avoid hell. Spirituality is for those that have already been there. So I checked out your short story collection, Nocturnal by Nature, and found it to be a broad spectrum agent of terror, relentless in its depiction of violence, and rich in psychological and supernatural themes. The stories not only disturbed, but also impressed me with their creative premises. I really enjoyed the collection, and I'm looking forward to exploring the dark inspiration behind the stories, as well as the process of their cultivation. So thank you for being on the show today.
It's a privilege. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. Well, so the title Nocturnal by Nature is catchy and subtly alliterative. Titles often carry thematic weight. So how do you feel Nocturnal by Nature reflects the themes of the stories inside? Did you intend for it to act as a sort of mission statement for the collection?
Yes. Up until Nocturnal by Nature, the novels that I've released haven't really gone too dark. Relatively speaking to mainstream horror, I would say that they're on the accessible spectrum. They're scary, but they're not extreme. With Nocturnal by Nature, it is a collection of short stories that I have been letting my subscribers on Patreon have first glances at. They're sort of experimental and go a little darker, push the envelope a little further. And once I amassed, I think there are 11 stories in there, I looked at them all together and I was like, these are pretty dark. And by nature, I am quite I don't want to say like a dark person, but I'm not like happy go lucky. I'm not bubbly. I'm not an extrovert. And I've always been physically a more nocturnal person. I prefer to stay up late. And so, as a mission statement, it serves me as well as the work. It's letting my readers know that this is kind of a darker step into new terrain. And even the foreword that was written by Felix Blackwell, he kind of alludes to that. He was like, Nick unleashes a side in this collection that may shock readers who are familiar with his previous work. But as far as the alliteration, I always get jokes, references to Naughty by Nature. So there's that.
Yeah, I can totally, even though I have a podcast, I totally relate. I'm kind of partial to cold, rainy days. Like, I know places like Seattle. I mean, I can understand why a lot of people might be depressed by that because, there's lack of vitamin D and whatnot. But I love cold, rainy days. I just don't foresee myself ever getting depressed over that. Is that kind of your inclination?
Yes, I'm kind of both ways in that I also consider myself a beach bum. It's my dream to go to, like, to the Florida Keys and have my own little place down there like Hemingway and do all of my writing there. But also, I love when I lived in West Virginia, I loved being in the mountains and like I like being up at night. It's just I don't get the seasonal depression, I guess, like other people do. Like you said, I'm perfectly content with the rainy night, rainy day, snowy weather. I guess when you have a nonstop hurricane in your head, the external doesn't really affect it as much.
Yeah, you mentioned Hemingway and the Keys. I'm in recovery like you are, but my pre-recovery ideal kind of in relation to that would be like the Rum Diary, San Juan, Puerto Rico, Hunter S. Thompson.
Yes, it's funny you brought that up because in my late teens, as I was getting into college, I would justify my drug use and my drinking by saying, "Look, I'm a creative person. Look
Uh-huh.
at Hunter S. Thompson. It won't affect my day job. It might help it out."
Yeah.
So I can read him now and appreciate him at a deeper level than I ever did before. There's more to him than just watching the Johnny Depp movie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've always wondered. I remember reading something about Cormac McCarthy talking about drinking being a handicap for a writer, and I always wondered, like, what it's hard to know anything about him. I think he did one televised interview with Oprah, and then I think that's it. So, I mean, it's hard to know anything about him. I'm kind of curious to know what his relationship and experience with alcohol was, but I digress.
Yeah, I mean, I could go into a deep dive with you on that just
Yeah,
by reading his prose
yeah.
and the stories and all that. But yeah, I think the best we'll get to know Cormac, unfortunately, is through the legacy of his work.
Mhm. Yes,
And he
indeed.
is, he is one of my favorite authors.
Absolutely. Well, circling to your book, the first story and the collection's namesake is about a brother and sister that are on their way home from making a road trip to their father's funeral. They stop off at what appears to be the only service station for miles and come into contact with a horrific gas station attendant. And that is where the story goes straight to hell. So there's this heavy sense of claustrophobia, being trapped in a car, a bathroom, or just a situation, period. Is that a conscious motif in your horror? And what does it symbolize for you?
I have not so much a claustrophobia in the traditional sense of being like in an elevator and being scared. My claustrophobia is like going to a party and not having driven there and not having an exit. So if I don't feel like I can get to like my safe zone, then I start to feel like claustrophobic. But in terms of the story, it kind of emerged literally from driving down the road, and I said the next thing I look at that catches my eye, I'm going to work into this Patreon story for the month. And I drove past this construction zone, and there's this bright blue porta potty. And I look over there, and I literally said, "Oh shit!" And
No pun intended.
said, "Exactly." So I said, "How can I write a convincing story that's actually scary about someone being stuck in a porta potty?" And apparently, I still haven't read it, but apparently Stephen King did the exact same thing. He said he was looking for an idea for a story. He passed a porta potty, and it's in one of his earlier collections. But I did not know that when I wrote Nocturnal by Nature.
Hmm. Now, you were talking about feeling claustrophobic at a party. Are you talking about in relation to maybe having some drinking cravings by being around alcohol?
No, I just mean like social gatherings in general.
Oh, okay.
Like I have to drive everywhere. It's a weird obsession for me. It just goes back to childhood, just riding in the back seat and feeling totally out of control, even though I knew I could ask for like my parents to pull over to use the restroom on like a road trip. I had like this insane fear of doing that. And that lack of control, I think, is the deepest underlying issue with me. Like, if I don't feel like I have control over a situation, at least in terms of having some sort of exit physically or mentally, I start to feel weird.
So, not only driving yourself, but also not getting pinned in to where you have to ask somebody to move their car.
Yeah, over Easter, I drove to West Virginia with my wife and my kids, and we went to see my mom and extended family. And we actually stayed at my mom's house because we were the only ones coming from out of town. So we were there first. So we were parked up against the house. And then I saw car after car after car pulling the long driveway. But the thing that really didn't bother me is that I was technically home. That's where I was staying.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going anywhere. Now, if I was at like my uncle's house and that situation happened, then I wouldn't freak out or have a panic attack, but it would just be constantly on my mind. What if you need to leave right now? You would have to ask someone to move their car. It would be this terrible inconvenience. And that's just how neurotic I can get.
Yeah.
So
Well, I can relate,
I
trust
don't,
me.
I guess that's just a fear of what other people think. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. With me, a lot of times it's like, and I haven't been to. Well, no, I take that back. I've been over to my in-laws, but my in-laws, it's not like being at some drunken, insane party. I haven't been to like a party where, people are really going hard and I'm like, oh, I need to get out of here. I can't even remember the last time, but yeah, I would always obviously drive myself. If I was going with somebody, we took separate cars and I parked like a mile down the road in the street, so
Yeah.
so I wouldn't have to ask anybody to leave because yeah, it's like when you have to ask a bunch of people to move, it's like you're climbing up on some sort of a platform and lights are being shined on you, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, circling back to the book, we talked about this a little bit as far as I think you were implying that your previous stories weren't quite as graphic in the depiction of violence. In these stories, your descriptions are unflinching, graphic, and physical. So, what role does body horror play in your storytelling? And what line, if any, do you draw between intensity and excess?
So my philosophy on violence is that it's supposed to be horrific. Real life violence repulses me. I can't watch like videos of surgery or like even like Dr. Pimple Popper. Like I can't do real life violence. I can't look at like if my kid scratches their knee and they're bleeding, it kind of makes me queasy. But on the page, it's all make believe. I understand that it has a different effect on readers and it induces the same reaction in the brain that it might occur to me when I see real life violence. But the reason I chose to open this collection with that story in particular, the title story is Nocturnal by Nature. I put it at the front and center for a reason. And it's because I believe it contains the most disturbing and violent scenes in the rest of the collection. And I wanted to put that right up front. Like, if you can get past this, you're going to survive. You're going to have fun. Hopefully, it's going to feel like you're not riding the same ride, that you just go from one type of scare to a different one. And the best compliment I got when I released this collection was a reviewer said it felt like 11 different people wrote this book.
Oh, wow.
And that made me feel so good. The last thing I want to be as an author is pinned down and not have any versatility or range. When I write a series of novels, if I have the chance to do a collection like this, I want to show that I'm more than just this series of novels. So I think short story collections allow authors to kind of flex their muscles in ways that you couldn't see otherwise. The second part of your question, as far as like drawing the line, I fully believe that nothing is off limits as long as it is in service to the narrative. I'm 100% behind narrative authenticity. It's up to readers to determine what they find repulsive, what they find gratuitous. If they don't want to read that, don't read it. There are certain things I don't enjoy reading, and there's certain things that I can't envision myself writing about. However, if I were writing a novel, like I don't outline. So as these characters make these decisions and I know them a little better and something horrible happens or like a terrible thought emerges in a character's mind, I'm not going to be one to shy away from going there as long as it serves the narrative. So, I've heard like splatterpunk described as being violence with a socially conscious message embedded in it, and extreme horror being horror and violence just for the sake of shock, which both are valid subgenres. The violence in my books, first of all, I think they're shorter and brutal, and they would fall more to the extreme because, like in real life, a fist fight doesn't last normally 10 minutes. Like if you're in a bar, it's normally like a few punches thrown. It's fast, it's quick, it's brutal, and literally you're gut punched. You're like, what the hell just happened? That's how I want my violence or my shocking scenes to happen in my books. I want them to feel like they came out of nowhere and genuinely shock people by that juxtaposition. So, yeah, that's my long winded response.
Well, long-winded responses are thorough. Yeah, I'm not going to give anything away, but I was kind of thinking about the
we can talk about it.
Oh, well, basically what I was going to say is that in the story, the brother, when he's attacked by the attendant, the horror is a fierce gut punch and extreme right off the top as far as the violence. But then to add insult to injury, there's that assault where you're like, whoa, holy shit.
Yes.
And I was going to ask you, so I've had this conversation with a couple of different people, the difference between splatterpunk and extreme horror. And so you said splatterpunk was violence with an underlining what message?
A socially conscious message.
Socially conscious message. Okay.
Yeah, conveying something, commenting on society in some way. They're proving a point or saying something other than just violence for shock value.
Okay.
I've talked to authors who operate in those genres, and that's how they have informed me. So if I'm speaking out of turn, then I'm blaming the.
Oh yeah,
the
no. I'm just. I don't know that I've ever I'm gonna have to look it up. Let's see, because for the longest time, I was kind of like, well, splatterpunk is over the top gore and violence. For the sake of it, I mean, that's like its shtick is being over the top, and then extreme violence is
more grounded.
Yeah, it's grounded, but as the name implies, it's extreme. It's the soul crushing stuff, like the sexual assault of young people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Let's see what we got here. Let me. I'm gonna bring this up. So we have splatterpunk and extreme horror are subgenres of horror that share graphic violence but have distinct characteristics. Splatterpunk, often associated with a countercultural movement, emphasizes excessive gore, a tongue-in-cheek or even humorous perspective, and sometimes a focus on social commentary. Extreme horror, on the other hand, aims to disturb and frighten the reader with serious, often unflinching depictions of violence and may delve into taboo. Yeah, so I guess that's kind of what you said, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we were both right. It mentioned being over the top, and it also mentioned having a message. So
yeah. All right. Well, I feel like we've narrowed something down here. Awesome. Well, circling back to the book, the next story, Neighbor, follows a man named Trent and his wife, Lindsay. After dealing with neighbors who brought a lot of drama, they were relieved to see them move out. However, after the house goes on the market and the for sale sign is removed, there's no sign of activity for quite a while. That is, until one day when Trent sees a dark figure standing at the window of the seemingly empty house. And from there, bizarre things begin to happen. And the relationship between Trent and Lindsay feels very grounded. Realistic arguments, casual affection, and shared suspicion. How do you write couples in a way that feels authentic before you put them through hell?
It's odd because I start off basically with nothing more than names. And I put those names into a situation, and sometimes it's the dialogue that latches me on and helps flesh out the character. Okay, he just responded with this sarcastic response to something she was seriously inquiring about. That tells me that they have some sort of relationship. Let me focus more on that. And I kind of naturally bring it out that way. Yeah, obviously, I'm married. I can pull from my own experiences, but I don't typically do that because it doesn't interest me. I like to jump in the minds of other people and see how they would react in situations like that. And my whole goal with writing horror is you take the horror out of the story and it's still a compelling narrative. It's still a compelling drama because you care about the characters. Horror, to me, first and foremost, is a character driven genre. If you don't care about them, it's not, in my opinion, truly going to be horrific when something bad happens. The stakes won't be as high. Now, on the flip side of that, when you're going for a different subgenre, let's say slasher, the slasher is the star of the show. You don't typically need to care about the teens at Camp Crystal Lake when Jason shows up. The scare is the star. But with the type of fiction that I write, especially with chamber pieces like Neighbor, where it's just this couple, and you have to have some kind of interesting dynamic, or it's just going to feel flat and static, no matter what kind of invasion or situation they're thrown in.
Gotcha. Well, the next story, The Copper Thieves, is about drug addicts that sneak into a cemetery to steal copper vases at first. It's not just vases, though. It escalates into tombstone plates and finally the trim on caskets. So, what interests you about that moral descent, and how do you build a horror story on growing ethical collapse?
So this one was the easiest one in the collection for me because I was at that cemetery in Columbus, Ohio. This story is actually loosely based on actual events. Obviously, the ending of my short story, we don't know what really happened.
It would be nice
But
if that really happened.
yeah, the true story is that my wife and I were in Columbus and we did this ghost walk through the second largest cemetery in the city. And I mean, it's just miles and miles of these just rows that you could drive a golf cart through and do it all day and just see all these different mausoleums. And you can tell who had generational wealth and who was just a peasant that was thrown in an unmarked grave. And our tour guide told us, he said, now these mausoleums over here, the reason why they're damaged and they haven't been rebuilt or furnished yet is because they're so old that they had copper in the caskets and people broke in, stole the copper from the caskets, and the families own or willed those mausoleums aren't in existence anymore, or I don't know if, but the board of directors at this cemetery basically didn't want to pony up the money to repair the mausoleums. So yeah, the people who stole the copper got away with it. I'm from West Virginia, where the opioid epidemic is still running rampant. It's getting better. Meth is a whole different beast that thank God that I never got pulled into. But yeah, I did terrible things in my active addiction that I'm not proud of, that I had to make amends for. And so it was easy, believe it or not, for me to jump in the mind of a junkie who is desperate and willing to do anything to get that fixed to feel better. And as I did that, I could have taken the easier route and made them more empathetic, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make it more Tales from the Crypt literally from the crypt, but have that more of a they do something bad and they get their comeuppance rather than having a sympathetic person in that trio because it's just bad people. So I think that's what makes the end satisfying. But ultimately, that story is about the disturbing links human beings will go in their addiction.
Yeah, and the opioid epidemic is particularly troubling because, it's one thing, nobody's ever gone to a doctor and been erroneously prescribed meth and then gotten addicted to it, but they have done
Yeah.
that with opiates. Working class people that have back problems, joint problems, like, oh, here, take this pill, it'll completely fix what ails you, which it does as advertised, but
Yes.
there's a much more deviant process underneath, and it doesn't end well for anybody. But that's interesting. I know somebody that was on Suboxone trying to get off of opioids, and they could not get the Suboxone until the literal next day where they would be out. And if that pharmacy was out of it and had to order it, they had to detox. And like particular pharmacies would not deal with opiates or narcotics like that because the more patients that they had that they were servicing that for, the more prone they were to get audited. And nobody wanted to deal with that headache. So it was impossible to find places that would stock this stuff. I mean, but you say it's still as hard as it is to get these days. There's still, I guess, like an illegal network for it.
Oh, yeah. I've been clean and sober 13 years now, so a lot has changed. But as far as like legislation at the top down and regulation on who can prescribe these narcotics and how much they can, limiting the amount of refills, stuff like that. And then all of the recovery programs that have been deployed. I was on the board of directors of one of the largest recovery network in West Virginia at one point, and I was on the front lines and seeing what was working, what wasn't working, and it's scary. And like as soon as you solve one ground level problem, someone at the top makes another decision that will make them and their company millions of dollars, and now you're back to
Square one.
a flooded market. But yeah, so
And I guess in West Virginia, there's probably plenty of rural areas where meth can be cooked under the radar.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
and it doesn't even have to be rural.
Oh,
Yeah, and it's the street I grew up on, and I lived in a middle class suburb. But you drove out this road that was like a back road that ran parallel to the river, and you had a bunch of trailers down there. And I remember one of them just blew up from meth fire.
yeah.
So, I mean, it's take your soul, man. That's
Yeah.
all I can say.
Yeah. Well, circling back to the book, the next story, Red All Over, follows a woman named Alessandra who is driving home in a torrential rainstorm after being sexually assaulted at a frat party. And in the story notes, you mentioned that a Brazilian publishing house contacted you about contributing to a giallo inspired anthology and that you wanted this story to kind of play out like a Dario Argento film. And, that influence definitely comes through in the imagery, tension, and stylized violence. So, for listeners who might not know the genre well, how would you describe giallo and what excites you about writing in that style?
What excited me about taking on this project was the fact that I felt it was such a visual medium that it would be so hard to convey all that into a story. And then I did my own research. I didn't know that giallo was a type of literature before the films. I guess I'm not as educated in that as I could be, but I believe, giallo obviously it means yellow. And I think that when these giallo books first came out, they all had yellow
Yeah,
covers.
here's one right here. Oh, well, I guess maybe not that one, but I imagine here we go, I think. Yeah, right here.
So yeah, And then that naturally, they would take stories like that, like pulp crime, and turn them into the Dario Argento type of horror, where you take those elements and then throw in the lavish colors and all that. So my philosophy when I get invited to any anthology, first of all, if I have the time to do it, that's the first hurdle to get over. But this one really caught me because I said, there's no way you can take a giallo movie into a story. And when I get to a challenge like that, I want to grow as a writer. So I accepted, and one of the trademarks of giallo is normally it's a young female who is in a foreign country. And I kind of wanted to flip it on its head. I didn't want to have an American girl go to Italy or something like that. The girl was from Brazil and she came up to the hills of Appalachia. I wanted to kind of invert it or subvert it and make the Appalachian region, West Virginia, be the foreign land. And she's an exchange student. She's there on scholarship. And once that second half of the story kind of kicks off and it's kind of a chase sequence, that's when I really nailed in the giallo elements. Now, there are some people out there who will die by the rules of giallo and what constitutes one and what isn't. But from my understanding, you got to have black gloves. You've got to have a mask. There's got to be a knife involved at some point. Now, that's just on the killer side. On the style side, you need bombastic music. You need over the top colors. So, how do I do that when writing a story? So, I put her in a car and I had a person who commandeered a police car behind her, and I make sure to emphasize the bright red flashing light that's on top of the police car, like one of those red gumball police lights. I make sure to keep referencing the songs that are on the radio because at one point the girl's driving through town being chased. It's in the middle of the night, so she cranks up the radio to maybe get people to hear, wake people up. And it's playing this like techno music. And I don't remember if I said it in the 70s or not. If I did, it would have been because that's when most giallo films came out. But yeah, I had her turn on a radio station as a call for help. And it was like, check out this new music. And it was like, kind of techno beats, basically. So I would tell the narrative, okay, she's driving. Now she gets out. And I would keep cutting in my head, okay, remember to keep referencing the lights that are flashing on the inside of the church. Okay, remember to keep referencing that there's music playing in the background as all this is happening. And try to make it as visual as I could. In one scene, she's sitting in her car when the cop, in quotation marks, pulls her over, and the cop lights are like bright and flashing on her, so she can't see in her rear view. She only sees his silhouette. And when he approaches her window as she's still in her car, I make sure to mention that she's looking through her window and it's a taller person. So she sees only kind of the torso and the gloves. And, I try to play by those rules. And, people who don't know anything about this subgenre, those little things still service the narrative, but they're not the Easter eggs that cinephiles of Argento would catch on to.
Yeah. Also, you were talking about the music that she's playing when she crashes into that church. Soundtracks are often aggressive, pounding drums, weird synths, and shrieking strings.
Yes.
Yeah.
I listen to them frequently when I'm writing, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, one thing about the story, the line, she knew water, echoes multiple times in the story and becomes a kind of mantra for Alessandra. What does that phrase represent to you? Instinct, memory, power, something else?
I think it was Bruce Lee who talked about the fluidity of water and how we should be like water because it's fluid and adjustable and adaptable. So, for one, she's there on a swimming scholarship. And so I could constantly go back to that mantra. And as these different things are happening to her, these different obstacles, she's able to overadapt. And every time she overadapts or overcomes one of these situations in the story, I kind of throw that mantra back in there. So, yeah, I'd like to take credit that that was there the whole time, but the repetition of it came more in the revision. That's what I do. I write and then I go back and make it look like I knew what I was doing all along. So.
Well, your next story, Devil in the Snow, is one of my favorite types of stories, what I like to call revisionist vampire tales. You take the concept of a vampire and maintain some of the classical aspects of the trope, but then either strip away or augment others in really compelling ways. In the story, Caleb is sent by his mother to visit his brother Rich, where he's supposed to spend a month getting sober, an effort to help him get his life together because addiction has made it unmanageable. The vampire desperately craves blood and devours people with reckless abandon, much like an addict. And the story takes place in the extremely cold setting of Anchorage, Alaska. So I might be reading too much into this, but was the vampire meant to represent addiction and the environment a metaphor for quitting cold turkey?
I like that. I like that.
I figured I might be reading too much into it.
I'm going to go with that from now.
Yeah.
No, so that was all 100% true. What happened? I mean, minus the vampire. I was struggling in my teens, and one of the solutions that my parents had was to go stay with your brother on an Air Force base in Anchorage, Alaska, for a month in the winter, and basically try to, go cold turkey. I guess just trying that geographical change, which, as anyone in recovery knows, that does not work, because wherever you go, there you are with your own problems. So that was another one of those situations where I was invited to contribute to a collection on vampires, and nothing in literature or horror bores me worse than vampires. I can name maybe 5 vampire novels that I love, and one of the ones that just came out by Stephen Graham Jones, Buffalo Hunter Hunter, is phenomenal. But Devil in the Snow. So I took it as a challenge. I'm like, okay, if I'm going to be so critical of these other vampire stories, put up or shut up. Write your own. So that's what I did. And I always wanted to tell that part of my life where I stayed with my brother on the Air Force Base. And I really did walk down the streets of Anchorage and I talked to all those vendors who were selling things. I never bought anything. That's where the story turns into fiction. But in the story, the younger brother, he buys a trinket that unleashes an ancient entity, a vampire, more in the native sense than the Eastern European type of vampire. Much more 30 Days of Night than Dracula. And that's a very personal story for me, because my older brother, he was in recovery for many years, and he ended up passing away as a result of his addiction a couple of years ago. And it was probably like 2 months after he passed that I was asked to do this story. And I thought, what better time than now than to revisit that time that I spent with my brother? It might be cathartic in some way. It might, who knows? So I tried writing it, and I thought I was going to be miserable and sad. And it wasn't. Every time I sat down to write that story, I visualize what happens in the scenes. I feel like I am those characters. When I wrote that story, I felt like I was able to have a conversation with my brother again. It was like I was hanging out with him. And it was so bizarre and so fulfilling. And I felt like by the end of the story that I told a decent enough vampire story, but you could strip away the vampire element, and I told a good story about brothers and the power of brotherhood and sacrifice.
Gotcha. Yeah. Not to make light of what you just said, but what I was thinking about was how old are you?
Um, I'll be 39 in October.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So I don't know. Did you ever watch Bill and Ted's Anything Excellent
Oh
Adventure?
yeah.
Oh, okay. So the threat for them screwing up was always going to military school in Alaska. I don't know why. That's what was stuck in my head when you said your parents were like, "We're sending you to Alaska."
Man, that would have been deeply buried in my subconscious if that had any influence on this story.
Yeah. Well, your next story on a later day follows a man named Tim who is serving as a test subject for an experimental computer application. And I love like tech dystopian style stories. So I really like this one. The app uses a person's past actions and digital footprint to predict their future behavior. Tim's story hits on a deeper fear that our worst impulses are inevitable. Do you think we're all at risk of becoming what algorithms say we are?
Um, I think that we are definitely at risk of being programmed and directed by algorithms. Just because our phones technology is getting smarter and smarter by the day, it feeds us the information. It knows that we like to look at. It shows us the stuff that we know. It knows that we're going to click on, and that alters your perception of the world. That changes you as a human being. So, yeah, it's a terrifying reality that we're going through. And in Clay Chapman's latest book, Wake Up and Open Your Eyes, in which it's like a mass possession via social media, TV, news, and it's seeing like that relative or whatever that you've known and loved your whole life start spouting some crazy stuff and regurgitating the things that you hear on TV. And it's like they literally are being possessed by what is being programmed. And that's just a terrifying notion. And when I was teaching, that was something I focused heavily on as an English teacher was media literacy, was being able to critically think about what you're watching and not try to teach people, but, teach them how to learn. It's a scary world having kids at different ages. That's a big fear for me is to make sure that what they're seeing on their devices they can distinguish from reality and this facade, you know, especially like with my daughter, if she's 8 and, you know, maybe she's looking at Instagram and seeing all these filters and seeing what Instagram is saying a pretty girl looks like. And who knows what that does to a person's psyche at the age of 8 when the brain's still forming. I mean, I could go on forever about the internet or its effect on our brains, especially developing brains.
Well, I mean, you
But
you mentioned Instagram filters. That used to be what you had to worry about to give, especially young women, like this unattainable image to aspire to. Now, you don't have to airbrush or Photoshop or anything. There's just an AI app where you can
yeah,
upload your picture and it slaps you onto a hard body and it looks real as real can be. So.
yeah,
Well, so I wanted to kind of skip ahead a little bit to your next story. Slinky has a very interesting origin. You mentioned that you mentioned in the story notes that in the Books of Horror Facebook group, a member had been posting photos of her daughter's spooky artwork. And wanting to encourage the young artist to keep creating, you, in a way, commissioned her to make a piece for you, which you then used as the inspiration for this story. And is it all right? I mean, I know it's kind of like straight out of your book. Is it all right if I display the image?
yeah.
Okay. Let me. So,
When I saw that, I reached out to the mom who had posted it, and I said, I want to inspire your daughter to keep on pursuing this. Like I was genuinely creeped out by some of these drawings
Uh,
that she did. So, not only could I help her, but it was also helping me and being able to have this cool little aspect to this story. And I think she was 13, 12, 13, something like that. So she wasn't a child. So when I messaged the mom, I said, "So how far can I go with this?" And she said, "As far and as dark as you want."
ooh, Lord.
so so I said, "Okay," because I guess that's what the daughter, that's what she likes. So
Uh-huh.
that's what I did. But I will say, in that story, compared to like the opening story, Nocturnal by Nature, that has brutal, extreme violence, Slinky is more, yes, it's violent. It's super violent. It's so over the top violent.
Yeah.
And it's set on Christmas Eve. It borders on absurdity. So I think it's more like an Evil Dead or like a Dead Alive, like Peter Jackson, Sam Raimi type of horror than anything as scary as like something that happens in the movie Deliverance, which kind of inspired Nocturnal by Nature.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like even though you have this monster that's just decimating this family, the teenage girl protagonist, she lives, and so I hope I did the girl some kind of service by you know giving her a story that was based on her drawing and was all about a very strong-willed, resourceful protagonist kid that you don't often see in horror.
Did you get any feedback from her? Did she read the story?
So yeah, this was a Patreon story first. So they were just thrilled that I was writing a story and had that drawing. Like I don't have a direct connection to the daughter, but the mom, if she did respond or reach out, it was like just maybe like a brief thank you. We enjoyed this. It wasn't like a detailed, breakdown of, you know, how great the story was or anything like that.
Gotcha. All right. Well, your next story, Ode to October, is an interesting piece of flash fiction. You've explored transformation, addiction, and moral decay in other stories. How does Ode to October reflect or expand on the themes you've touched on elsewhere in the collection?
I've always wanted to write my first person narrative of being in the mind of a killer, but I didn't want to do it like arbitrarily because American Psycho has been done, Dexter has been done, May Fly has been done. I don't want to do retreads, but I wanted to get inside of that mind behind the mask and see what was ticking. And this was my trial because I am writing a novel. It's a Patreon serialized novel, but I am writing currently a first person serial killer novel. Ode to October was my tryout. It's highly stylized in how each paragraph is kind of the same length. I think they all start with a word that starts with O. It's about a guy who buys a Halloween mask, and as soon as October hits, his dark side comes out and he goes on the hunt. So it's very like Michael Myers ish, but I wanted to have not so much explore like reasoning, but I wanted to get that camera perspective of the killer approaching and stalking. And I wanted to explore that on the page and see what that looked like. So that's where Ode to October came from. And I had a good time with it. It was very quick and easy to write. And I didn't hold back. um, but more importantly, for my own growth as a writer, I learned more of the voice I wanted to tell my story in. And it wasn't the voice that's in Ode to October. So I don't feel like I wasted time in learning how to write in a style that I'm currently utilizing.
Well, so in your next story, I mean, I guess it kind of makes me sound like a sick SOB, but I mean, I have a great appreciation for the stories with a soul crushing ending. So, in your next story, You Girls and Your Gore, you tell the story of a girl and her friends having a sleepover where they inadvertently wake the spirit of a dead family member. And you state in the story notes that you went through three different endings, each progressively darker, and that the final version still disturbs you, which I can totally understand. So you mentioned just in general, I suppose, that writing is cathartic for you. But in this case, even though it's a great story, it left you disturbed. So was it harmful to you personally?
So as I was writing each ending, I didn't feel like it went far enough.
Oh, okay.
I felt like with a title, You Girls and Your Gore, and I've had that title forever. And it was always a quote that was going to be in the story. It was always going to be like a parent shaking their head, being like, You girls and your gore. And I've had that for a while. The endings, originally, it was just the puppet. And I was like, no, that's
And
been done a million times.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the puppet, was that like the Charlie McCarthy ventriloquist dummy? Oh, we got visual aids
It's
here. All right. Yes.
based off
Yeah.
this little antique guy that I got from
Okay.
a store in West Virginia.
Oh my God, is there ashes in his head?
I hope not.
Jesus, put it down.
That's where my daughter makes me keep it, over there in the corner with Annabelle and
Oh God.
my other scary things. But yeah, so a lot of that story is true, in that I was kind of the dad in that story because I had a basement at our old house in West Virginia, and it had all of my horror movie memorabilia. I had my favorite movie posters on the wall. I had all of my horror novels, and I had masks and stuff on display. So my kids were younger then, and they would bring their friends over and not think anything of going down into daddy's basement. But their friends would step down there and see all this stuff and freak out. So I quickly got the reputation in the neighborhood of having the creepy basement, and they all knew I was a horror author, and I wasn't a weirdo. But yeah, so I took actually I am a weirdo because I took great pride in scaring kids
Yeah.
and being the creepy guy with the basement. But yeah, so at first I was like, no, the puppet thing has been done to death. And then I was like, oh, what if it's a brotherly revenge type of tale? And he gets the guy's own daughter just to enact his revenge. That's evil. And then I went a step further and I was like, that's fucking sinister.
Yeah.
And I hesitated. This was my pet cemetery. This was the one that I was like, do I hit publish on this and let my Patreon people read it? Like my wife and my mom, they are my first readers.
Oh gosh.
I did not let them read it.
Oh, okay.
What I did to proofread it to the best of my ability, because all of my Patreon people know that the stuff I upload there is not professionally edited. If it does make it into a collection, it will be. So what you read is the final edited version. But what I did was I read that story out loud to myself after I wrote it. So when you're reading something out loud, it's so much easier to catch typos and to catch anything because you're more focused on the words rather than the story. So any writers who are listening to this and you struggle with proofreading, there's a tip. And I stumbled upon that.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, kind of piggybacking off that, what is your preference when it comes to horror story endings? Like happy, bittersweet, or in this case, soul crushing? Do you think that preference is just a matter of taste, or does it reveal something deeper about a person's psychology?
I'd say 90% of the time it reveals more about a person's psychology, because even in reading, like if someone describes a glass that's equally filled with liquid. They have two ways of describing it. It can reveal a lot about a person and how they describe that glass. They could say that the glass is half full or it's half empty. And just going off of that shows you a pessimistic versus optimistic outlook. And that's deeply analyzing something. But I noticed it in Paul Tremblay's work. In Cabin at the End of the World, he literally described a glass as being half empty. And that has one of the most devastating things, pessimistic tones to it. And then I forget which other book he wrote and described a glass as being half full. And it was a more hopeful ending. So I don't know if that was intentional or not, but yeah, so in my writing, I think my readers, ever since The Exorcist House came out, even though that wasn't my first novel, that's the one that like blew up, and it had sort of an ambiguous gut punch ending. And then they went back and read my first novel, Anathema, and that has a devastating ending on par with You Girls and Your Gore. So my readers, I think, are coming to expect some sort of last final gut punch. That doesn't necessarily mean it's not a happy ending or a happy resolution. It's just that the characters didn't make it out unscathed. Like something's going to be permanently messed up having gone through this situation. And then some of the endings I write are just bleak, dark, and horrific.
Gotcha. So it sounds like you don't necessarily have a preference. It's just kind of organic to the story itself.
Yes. I mean, if you go by my track record, you would surmise that my preference is to end on a dark note because that's what happens most of the time. But even in like what some people would consider a dark and depressing ending, like I can still see the hope and the light and the changed outlook that happens. And so when people say like Anathema, my first book, they say it's like this dark, bleak ending. I always say it's a happy ending. And they look at me weird until I talk about it. So I'm trying to think of like horror books that have
What you
like
might
those.
what you might consider a bittersweet ending, or
Yeah.
yeah,
Stephen King, he's good at, I like the sentimentality that he has sometimes in his work where it does end. All the loose strings are tied in a nice bow, and the character suffered enough, and it's a happy ending. I mean, this isn't a horror story, but The Shawshank Redemption, that's my favorite thing that King ever wrote, and it's all about hope. So I guess in reading, I prefer maybe kind of a sentimental, happy ending, but also like ambiguity quite a bit.
yeah.
But in writing, I like to just kick my readers when they're down. So
Well, I'm
uh,
sure they appreciate it.
they expect it.
Yeah,
And as long as it fits the narrative,
we've all
I'm
got
going for
Stockholm syndrome.
it.
Well, the next and final story is The Panda. It's about a young boy and his single father. And in the story, the boy suffers from oppositional defiant disorder, which you mentioned in the story notes is something that you have personal experience with as a teacher. Can you talk a little bit about this disorder?
Yeah, so uh, there's this a book that can explain it way better than I can called The Explosive Child. And it's all about raising a child with oppositional defiance disorder because I have seen it in the classroom and I've experienced it as a parent. And while you're going through it, you feel hopeless. You feel like you're the only one. You feel like a failure as a parent. Like, what am I doing wrong? And it wasn't until I became educated on what the disorder is and how there is no, like, and I'll restate this again, I'm not a doctor, but as of right now, what I've heard is that there is no medicine that is prescribed strictly for oppositional defiance disorder. There are medications that can like regulate mood, but the best and most effective remedies for me personally that I've gone through have been more talking, more redirection, more offering the illusion of choice, offering the illusion of control, saying things like instead of, hey, go brush your teeth, say, hey, would you rather go 10 minutes and brush your teeth and play your game or, something else? And just offering like a choice, but the outcome is the same. So it's those little things. And the teenage years are rough, but it gets better with age from what I've been told. Now, the happy ending on my end is that, my stepson is thriving right now and has been for years. But I'm very good friends with someone who has a younger child who has it, and he's going through it, feeling the exact same things that I felt and feeling terrified for your child. And I recommended him that book. And I told him my experience and that it gets better. And there are ways of just de escalating situations. And this is one thing I wanted to depict in the Panda is if a child is going through one of the episodes in a public situation, it's so frustrating to see those looks from other parents or to hear like, I'd never let my kid get away with that.
Or why aren't you whipping his ass?
Exactly. So, yeah, that was just I kind of wrote that story for this friend. And I wanted to subvert expectations because in my book, Mean Spirited, there's a scene that the readers say gave them a jump scare from a book. And it's a scene where the character turns around to say goodnight to his son, and there's this white face under the bed looking at him. And then he goes down to look at it, and it's this stuffed panda that he doesn't remember buying. So everyone, like a lot of the fans of that book, say that they're terrified of their kids' stuffed pandas now, and that's kind of like been a running gag with me and my readers. Is like anytime I write a book, I'll reference like a panda, and they freak out. So I knew that in titling this story, The Panda, that people were going to go into it thinking it was going to be the creepiest story out of the collection. And in my mind, it's the most hopeful. It has that happy ending. And that's how the collection ends. So I kind of wanted to subvert expectations. Like I said, I wanted to start out with the hardest, grossest, most brutal story and then make you think that it's just going to get worse and worse and then kind of end on a lighter, more serious note that's more grounded in reality and more hopeful.
Yeah. It was definitely, I'm sitting here thinking like you should expand it into a novel and then on your website sell signed copies with a little plush panda.
So I actually did sell. I gave my Patreon members who are at a certain tier, they get monthly merch.
Oh, okay.
So I went to, I forget what store, but I bought a bunch of these little miniature pandas.
Nice.
Yeah, and kind of messed them up a little bit, sent them out.
Awesome. Well, it was a great collection. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So, listeners at home, buy it, read it, and review it. Well, so what is the life of Nick Roberts like outside of writing?
Well, an ideal day for me as a full-time author now, and it took, I started writing in 2020, like actually writing to try and submit to get published in 2020. So it's taken me 5 years. Well, I'll say 4.5 because it was last year, but yeah, to step out of the classroom, be able to support myself and my family from writing alone. And I have to maintain strict discipline with that. So my life is I wake up and take my kids to school. That gets me up and out of bed early in the morning. I immediately go to the gym. I exercise for about an hour and a half, and I come home. I'm jacked up on pre-workout and caffeine and feeling good. And I sit there and I do my AM writing session, which is no less than 1,000 words. So that typically takes me into the afternoon, and that's when I do all of my writing business type of things, whether that be shipping books, doing website things, social media, Patreon. I mean, there's a lot of things outside of writing when you're working with independent publishers and self-publishing. There's a lot of work other than just writing. But that's my lunch area. And then I'll go pick up my kids. My wife comes home. I normally am the cook. So evenings are with the family. After the kids go to bed, I stay up and I do my PM writing session. And again, it's no less than 1,000 words. And so ideally, on a perfect day, I've hit at least 2,000 words. I've spent some time with my family and I've gotten some exercise. As long as I maintain that schedule, I normally can crank out novels in 2 to 3 months.
Wow.
And operate Patreon stories and stuff like that on the side. So it's working. I'm not going to alter it. I was inspired by something Josh Mallerman said, where he creates a different routine for every novel he writes. So one thing I did once I started this new novel was I was tired of sitting there at my chair all day sometimes. And I was like, I'm going to get a standing desk. And that's why I've been standing this whole time
Yeah.
during this interview, as I have my own little standing desk. And it's been so cool to have it because I'll like come in, I'll bang out a paragraph real quick. And the thought might run off course. So I'll like take a step back, almost like I'm in a boxing ring. And then I'll
Yeah.
just like kind of
Bob and
jump back
weave.
into it. Yeah, and I'll have sometimes I'll put a mat under my feet, and I'll just kind of constantly keeping myself moving, and being more kinetic that way is helped me. And the fact that at some point I do want to sit down, so it motivates me to write faster. So yeah, but yeah, outside of writing, man, my hobbies are going to the beach, just doing stuff with the family. Kids have sports, all that good stuff. I love reading. I'm a huge horror movie buff, and that's the next stage of my writing career that I can't divulge too much about right now, but there will be some upcoming announcements that I
Dope.
can't wait to talk about.
Sounds like a good time, my friend.
Yes, sir.
Well, Nick, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
Likewise.
Well, so as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug or let your readers know about? Maybe change your mind and divulge some stuff that you don't know. Just playing.
Yeah, so as of right now, you can pre-order. It's called Urban Legends: Three New Tales of Terror. It's part of Crystal Lake Publishing's Dark Tide collection, where they get three authors to each write a novella about a certain theme. Our theme is urban legends. So you have me, Dan Franklin, and Lee Kenny, who wrote novellas about our own urban legends. It's got a foreword by Adam Caesar, who wrote Clown in a Cornfield. And as I was talking to Adam Caesar, he has a movie coming out May 9th called Clown in a Cornfield. So I said, hey man, you wrote the foreword for this collection. I'm going to try to make this book come out on May 9th, and we're going to kind of cross promote. And that's been cool being able to talk with him. So May 9th is the official release date for the Urban Legend collection. I also, 2 days ago, finished the final installment in the Exorcist House trilogy. Soon as I get off here, I'm going to start probably proofreading and going through and starting my second draft, but you can expect The Exorcist House Resurrection to come out September of 2025. And I just signed a deal with Simon & Schuster for my novel Lila in the Flesh.
Nice. All right.
Yep.
Sounds good. We all look forward to that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, listeners at home, all links are in the description. And Nick, thank you again for joining me.
Thanks for having me anytime.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest authors and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.